To the curious, the seekers, and the experts, welcome. You're listening to Poli-Psych Podcast. This week saw another Democratic candidate debate, and we wanted to, in keeping with our tradition of having analyzed the earlier ones, we wanted to take a look at these candidates and at the debate itself, some of the topics that came up. And of note to me personally, I'm Cindy, INFJ, Enneagram 2, Wing 1, was the talking points that were used by pretty much all of the candidates who spoke. And a couple of the talking points that they all seemed to hit hard was children in cages and criminal in the White House. And those phrases were repeated over and over, and it really gave me the impression that as the news is scripted and all of the different networks seem to use the same talking points, I felt that these debates were scripted. But I may be the only one who thinks that. We will find out in just a moment. With me today to discuss the talking points, the possible talking points, and other aspects of the debates are Ken. Hello, Ken.
Hello, Cindy.
And Don. Hello, Don.
Hello, Cindy and Ken.
So do either one of you agree or disagree with me about the talking points? Am I the only one who noticed that?
The only one. No, it was very evident. And in fact, the Republican Party tries to maintain the same level of continuity with their outgoing polemic, and I think that's a function of party membership and so on. In this case, it's interesting to abstract the strategy from the commentary, and it looks like the looming fact that if President Trump does win a second term, he would be in power until January 2025. Well into the middle of a decade we haven't even recognized yet on the calendar. And I think there's a bit of terror associated with that. And we're seeing a reaction that's based on panic and a clinging to strategies that may not really make a lot of sense in the broader scheme of things. And so I do agree with you, Cindy, and I, looking at it through that lens, see that is the looming issue. And the really staggering implication is that they're basically, if it was capable of going through, and I don't think it is, and I don't think we would either, the impeachment aim seems to be failing. But that would be, they would essentially be electing Pence as president, which is just kind of a humorous aside. And Mike Pence, I don't know how he would do in the general, theoretically, against these candidates either. Mike Pence is more of a centrist. I know he's cast as being an ultra-conservative, but it's really hard to pin him down. And he's a very enigmatic and chameleon-like personality. He's in MBTI terms an ISTJ, not dissimilar from the centrist neocon school that follows that same personality pattern. But what do you think, Don?
Well, I'm not so sure that if the Democrats in the House and would have to be also in the Senate voted to impeach and remove, convict and convict, that Pence wouldn't somehow also be implicated and they're also thrown off the bus too. That's, I'm sure, what the Democrats intend. Easier said than done. And I don't even really want to speculate too much down that line, just because I think it's all so improbable. And what I see happening is the Democrats have just become overconfident in their ability to control public opinion because they have such a lock on all of the mainstream media, with the exception of Fox News, which they like to say is all controlled by the right wingers, and all of the normal people believe everything else. So I think that is veneer is wearing pretty thin at the moment, and I don't see much of a possibility of success here, except to continue to attempt a narrative that seems to be failing on every front. And I think we're kind of coming down to crunch time here with the House. I do think it's likely that the House will actually recommend articles of impeachment. On what basis, I'm not sure. But having it go to the Senate is probably not going to play out the way the Democrats want it to. But that's as far as I'm ready to go down the road at this time. And I do kind of agree with you that Pence would tend to be a centrist and basically a party man, and go along with those that are in control. But the problem that the the Democrats have with him is that the Trump loyal people are now basically in control of the party, and that basically means that Pence would be their man, not an establishment man. So we'll see how it all plays out, but I don't think it's looking very good for the Democrats at this point.
Well, then if Mike Pence were to fall, that you would have President Pelosi, I believe. So.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the plan. That's what I've read. That's what I believe that they want to have. And then the scenario would run that once Pelosi is in there, then she would ally herself with Hillary Clinton, and then Hillary would get the nod to become president. And they want all that to happen before November 2020. I don't really see that happening. It seems like a bit of a stretch to me.
Let's take a peek at the Predictit. It's an interesting site. This is where we have sort of a group effort at bids and offers, and it's a way of essentially creating a market for probability. And we can look at the front runners there, and there also is a New York Times study that looks pretty well laid out. But I suggest we take it from the top down. Elizabeth Warren is in first place now. Pete Buttigieg Buttigieg, if I'm saying that right, is in second. Joe Biden is in some polls showing at the head of the whole pack, but we have him at third place in this site. And then Bernie Sanders. From there, it gets a little bit hypothetical. Mike Bloomberg is there. Andrew Yang. Hillary Clinton shows up on that tally. Amy Klobuchar made the list as well, but significant absence of Cory Booker. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, is not the darling of the media at the moment. So Cindy, who do you look to as the front runner on that on the Democratic side?
Watching the debate, the only one that has any appeal whatsoever for me is Tulsi. Now, if we were looking for a friend, Amy Klobuchar seems like she's probably a nice lady, and we haven't addressed this yet, but her shaking was very noticeable. Everybody commented on it. That I was live on Twitter during the debate, and the vast number of tweets I saw about the debates were about her shaking, and it's almost disturbing to see. I mean, I actually kind of felt badly for her, and when Don and I talked about watching the debate, I had two thoughts. Either somebody threatened her that she had to toe the line and she was frightened, or she was possibly so uncomfortable with some of the things that she was saying that she was trembling, and that was kind of a nod to Bombard's body language, whose analysis of this I can hardly wait to see. As far as I know, Body Language Ghost has not analyzed the debates yet, but I'm anxious to see what her take is on the fact that Amy Klobuchar was trembling like this. But I was to get back to your question. I don't see, quite honestly, I don't see a front runner. And if I had to bet on somebody as a candidate, I guess I'd bet on Hillary, going along with what Don was saying. But so that's my 2 cents worth on this betting site.
Well, a number of people are really saying, Hillary, we really want you. And who would we hear that from? Oh, yeah, that was from Hillary.
Yeah, Hillary's, we constantly hear that she's still actually running the Democrat Party from the shadows, and brings in a lot of...
Well, some people think it's Obama.
Yeah, well, between the two of them. So I don't know. It's interesting. Nobody has talked very much recently about Michelle Obama potentially running. That was a big topic a few months ago, and I'm not hearing that so much right now. So there's so many things in flux that I find it kind of difficult to even do a shoot from the hip analysis.
Yeah, I'd say it was the notable news, I think, on the whole. Just looking at the last month, is the emergence of Pete Buttigieg as a viable candidate, and he's showing up on the predicted in second place, and so he's now considered a front runner. And I wasn't able to get an MBTI read on him. I think the site is so far behind. The one we're using here is personalitydatabase.com. So the news or the back support for the news hasn't really showed up yet to take that into account. And it's actually a story that emerged last week. I think let's talk about any comments on Pete Buttigieg, or I want to segue into Joe Biden.
Well, I'm going to guess that I was actually kind of surprised at the ease with which Pete appeared to be in front of a camera and explaining himself and his positions and his views. There's a natural, I'm not sure if charismatic is the best word, but he's comfortable in front of an audience, in front of a camera, to a degree that I hadn't quite anticipated. I don't know if he's kind of growing into his role, or I noticed that, but I think that is, he's doing well in this field, maybe just because there's the flaws in others, personality-wise, are so apparent. Now, you could dig into his history, and you could find things there that are real problems, but just in front of a camera, I can see that he's looking pretty good. And Enneagram-wise, I'll say I'm thinking of him as a 3, somebody who presents well, who has self-confidence in front of an audience, in front of a group, who is not uncomfortable with the position of leadership, doesn't try to second-guess himself, takes positions that are popular but enough edge that he will appear to be somewhat of a visionary. So I'm wondering if he ran against President Trump, we'd see a 3 versus 3 Enneagram contest, and that would have some interesting aspects to it. So I do see him as more of a contender, Pete, than I did before. And then again, of course, in the heat of the campaign, there would be a lot of things that would come out, and you'd have to see how he would handle that. All I can say from the debate is he hits softballs pretty well.
Well, I have breaking news. Pete Buttigieg, INFJ. What do you think, Cindy?
Okay.
No.
I surprises. Do you feel pretty confident about Pete as an I?
Yes. I'm solid about the N, and I'm looking at the other choices. It looks like and there were 30 votes there. This is on the personalitydatabase.com format. So the second choice was ENFJ, but it only had 6 analysts on that. And so we have the NF uniformly function stack right through the top 4 choices. So
that makes sense to me for the Democrats. I do confess that NF seems right for Pete.
Well, let's talk to an INFJ. Do we have one here? Wait.
I wasn't. I'll say this: I did not resonate with him at all. Now that doesn't mean he's not an INFJ, but a lot of times, in face to face, a lot of times, because INFJs move so far toward empathy, there's a kind of a connection and understanding, even if to INF. It's just my experience. Even if maybe I don't have that much in common with the person, I feel drawn to them. I did not feel drawn to him, and perhaps it was because of just what he was saying and not interacting with him in the real world, just watching him on television. I wouldn't argue with that, I guess, and it is interesting. He is a gay man, and INFJs do tend to be, because of the empathy, and it's there are certain feminine characteristics kind of inherent in being an INFJ. Not that a masculine man can't be an INFJ. They do exist, but so there is that. And just one little thing about him is, if the Democrats want to find somebody that might be able to steal some Republican votes, I understand, I've been told by many people who are very familiar with the gay community that many gay men are actually Republicans. So I'm kind of wondering, if they were to run somebody who is a gay man, if they might be able to steal some Republican votes, some of the guys who might typically vote Republican, because if he were the candidate, they may switch to and vote Democrat. So that did occur to me.
Yeah, I interpret it. I've always looked at the expression of type as being separate from other attachments, and especially with the feeler, the psychology of the feeler, the logic of values, and values can vary endlessly. And we have the other famous INFJ is Adolf Hitler. So we can see a wide array of good, evil, and also dichotomous interpretations of good and evil occurring between feelers. So I think some of the biggest conflicts occur between feelers, and I think media, the function of media is to tinker with the logic of feelings or with the rationale of feelings and tweak that using subconscious intuitive linkages between, if you take two images and superimpose them over and over. The one they're working on now, this is highly theoretical, but it's also very practical, that Trump is a criminal. You saw that it must have been at least 20 or 25 instances of that. Cindy alluded to that in the intro. And media does this all the time. If they want to implant an output, it's much harder to tinker with a thinker, and mainly because there's one logic, usually, and if the logic is proven false, then the thinker is pretty adept at moving into the, thinkers don't like to be incorrect. So but the feeler thing, the logic of feeler, it can change. And I just parting ways on this issue for me, and then I'll open it up again for other discussion. But I get a pretty good feeling from Pete when he talks. He's got a way of putting the listener at ease in a way I can't quite put my finger on. But I think it's that feeler empathy for the listener that you don't get from the thinker, or the SFJ doesn't quite resonate that well. But Pete's got a pretty good. I see a big future for him.
Yeah, I agree that you're just putting in MBTI terms what I was expressing earlier about his persona, and I do think that his ability in front of an audience tends to come across well. So, yeah, pending how he handles the negative stuff, he does come across well.
Let's tackle Joe Biden. I'm concerned about Joe, and I mean that just from a human perspective. Those of us who've spent time looking at source uh, video and so on would probably arrive at the same conclusion that he's really he must be under a lot of pressure, possibly. But what was the feeling on his performance in this debate?
Well, he made a couple of blunders. But honestly, I'm just going to go in a feeler direction here. The thing that I really noticed about him in this debate, which I guess I've never noticed before, is his eyes are set very close. And in the animal world, that indicates a predator. And I'm not saying he's a predator. It just really struck me watching him how closely his eyes are set together, and again, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I was very struck by that. And he has his eyes do not look warm. It's hard to see it's almost impossible to see the whites of his eyes, because I looked. I mean, I was focused on his eyes when I noticed them, and I don't know about health, but he doesn't seem, the persona that he tries to project, I don't think is his true persona.
Yeah, I noticed his eyes too, slightly differently than you did. I wasn't noticing their distance apart, but the darkness, like you said, the absence of the whites really struck me. His eyes look very dark, and in somebody that is in front of a camera, normally you like to see some sparkle, some twinkle in the eye, a little like, yeah, I'm enjoying your company, feeling from being in front of the camera, relating to people. None of that with Joe. He was just the darkness of his eyes is what struck me, and just the lack of sparkle. There was almost a deadness, and it was, to me, it was quite striking.
The ENFJ comes up for Joe Biden, and it's an extraordinarily rare profile for males. And some of the minority profiles have a tough time in life, and sometimes are forced into personas that are there to to fit in with the social gravitational force of other types that are more prevalent. The primary types in the MBTI world are the ISTJ, ESTJ, which would be functionally the opposite of Joe's ENFJ, if that's accurate. But that may account for some of the discomfort. But I think Joe also has, just from an appearance standpoint, I think he has had some problems with corneal bleeding of the eye, and it unfortunately, politics is a modicum of show business involved, and I think that, again, it's a very tough job, and I think Amy Klobuchar was suffering from a little stage fright as well. And when that much pressure is put on people, they can't always show up quite the same way. Donald Trump, on the other hand, seems to be impervious from that.
I'm noticing on the Joe Biden personality database that they have him in the Enneagram as a 6-wing 7. I think that's certainly a possibility of Joe as a 6. I will tend to think that that's probably a second choice. Most 6s, in my experience, I will see the wheels turning in the mind a lot more than I see with Joe. With Joe, I see somebody that's kind of standing, observing, fielding different viewpoints and trying to stay in the middle. And in fact, that was his very first answer was, I'm the guy that can bring people together. Well, that's a 9 script. That's an Enneagram 9 that wants to and does actually merge their viewpoint with a lot of other people and find the middle path with whatever groups that they are in contact with. So I'm just saying I see Joe as a 9 and less effective than some 9s. Famous 9s would be Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, so-called. Joe does want to come off that way. That is I think his whole strategy and his whole life script is about, I'm the guy that can be, find the path that everybody can follow together and offend as few people as possible. But no, he lacks the charisma and the wit and ability to think on his feet that are essential in order to really be a superstar in politics.
One thing that I really have changed my thinking about Joe Biden since we did our video about Hunter Biden. And at that time, I was able to do a little bit deeper research in his life. And I think the loss of his wife and daughter, when that occurred, may have really, I mean, obviously it impacted him. It would impact anybody. But I think he's probably quite a different person now than he may have been had that not occurred.
Well, the thing about Joe, I think Joe Biden, we'll see how the Ukrainian situation shakes out. It's full of twists and turns and probably will remain so. And that is another thing that may be weighing on Joe a little bit stress-wise. He came right out of the gate with a few verbal stumbles that indicate a little bit of cognitive or at least anxiety. Just didn't seem to be all there that night, with occasional exceptions. But the other news comes from the dichotomy. I think you could see the more pragmatic Joe Biden approach, and I think Pete Buttigieg carries the same benefit of being able to sort of have that centrist appeal. And Tulsi is kind of going in a different, it's almost like a triangulation going on. So with there's a pragmatic centrist appeal to Buttigieg and also Joe Biden. And that's sort of balanced by a more radical stance from Liz Warren. And I'd kind of put Kamala Harris in that area as well, and certainly Bernie Sanders. And that is it's causing some tension within the Democratic Party. And the interesting thing is how Tulsi Gabbard fits into that. Tulsi is sort of standing back from both sides and trying to provide a kind of, take the high ground, so to speak, and a sort of self-reflective high ground. And she's proving to be quite a fighter, and it's causing some fireworks. I don't know if it's going to help her in her party, but I sometimes wonder if she wouldn't be better off, forming a third party. And I will put this out there in future shows possibly, but I see if there is a massive failure of the Democratic Party, I think you might see a new fusion of libertarians and populist Democrats coming together, centering around issues of liberty and environmental and things of that nature. I think it's hard to see at this point, but there's just nowhere else to go. The middle is getting very, it's just losing traction with the voters. The turnout isn't there. As soon as a candidate becomes centrist, their turnout falls through the floor. And it's not like the 50s where we don't have we have the internet now, and we've got an extreme speed of information transfer, and I think that will be a factor going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ken. I think that I think most everybody that's paying any degree of attention in politics now knows that we are living in momentous times, and I think it's in times that you have a general sense that things are steady and stable, that it's politically advantageous to go for the middle ground and basically stay the course and tweak a few things, but not try to rock the boat. We are not in those times. So I agree with you. It does seem to be self-defeating to go to the center when it's really more of a pioneering kind of an approach that is necessary as if people want to navigate into something new, which I think more and more people are seeing as necessary. A lot of people don't like President Trump, and his approach, and they want something that's new but different from his version of new. So yeah, I agree. There does seem to be some ground there to capture, and I do think that Tulsi Gabbard is attempting to position herself there. I don't know how effective she would be at recruiting people from both sides. There do seem to be a fair amount of people that are of the more libertarian sort that are attracted to her from the Republican Party. So I think it's possible. One of the things I did notice that she repeatedly stated was the idea with regard to foreign policy that we have the Trump Bush Clinton cabal, and she lumped President Trump in there. And of course, I don't see it that way. I think that she is trying to position herself to take to find people that disagree with President Trump's foreign policy, but also don't want to go back into the problems that we've had with endless wars. So I think she is attempting to position herself, and she does have a likable persona, not charismatic, but in the generally traditional sense. But there's a pleasantness about her that doesn't turn people off. I do think there is something to be said for the viewpoint that I heard recently that Tulsi is hated by other Democrats because she reminds them of what the Democrat Party used to stand for. And I think there's something to be said for looking at her that way. Because of her military background, I tend to think that she might be an Enneagram 6. I'm not completely sure about that. I think we might have talked about her in past, and we might have said that she might be a 3. And of course, the 369 have access to all 3 of those centers, and can be a little bit harder to read because any one of those 3 types will draw from the other 2 centers in their stress and security points. So I'm seeing that Tulsi does have something of a 6 quality about her that is common of people in the military, where they are used to relating to the group in a sense that the 9s do that, but in a different way. The 3s do that, but in a different way. And I think Tulsi definitely is somebody to be watched in the future.
I'd agree with you, Don. I think Donald Trump is not like anybody, really. He's coming from a populist. Certainly, we could put that label on President Trump, but he's not a politician either. I think he's learning pretty quickly, and certainly did pretty well in his entry level position as president. And just looking at the issues that were discussed, President Trump was number one, way above the others. Other issues being healthcare and child care, and it was interspersed with some hand wringing over focusing on Trump too much. I think Bernie Sanders had probably the most interesting comment, but it was sort of a backhanded attack also. So he did the typical attack Trump, and then on the other hand said we'll lose the election if we focus on President Trump. And the problem, I think and this came up a few times, is the attack that was leveled at Tulsi by Kamala Harris against Trump. There's no way you would be in that debate would want to take a position to defend President Trump. So they can throw outrageous whatever claim they want to, that President Trump eats babies for breakfast or whatever, and nobody's there to defend him or push back on that. And I think you'll see that sort of emotional manipulation occurring going forward as the debates go out into the future. I think I don't know what you think, Cindy, but I'm looking at that New York Times list, and they're attempting. The New York Times is attempting to narrow the field a little bit, and we see for the next. I see that little check mark, qualified for the December debate, and they've knocked out Andrew Yang, Cory Booker, who, I don't know. He seems like he should be stronger than he is at this point. Tulsi's not on that list, and Tom Steyer is kind of a non-entity on that list. So they've narrowed it down to Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, and then they've got Joe in first place for some reason.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little relieved that Tom Steyer is being taken out. I don't know how serious that ever was, but a couple of years ago, I was looking at Gillum's race, and I did a video about it at that time. And I learned how much of Gillum's funding came from Tom Steyer, so I did a little bit of research on Tom Steyer at that time. I'm very uncomfortable with his background, things that he's done, and again, I would be relieved to learn that he's not seriously in the running.
Well, his likability factor is just way low. He gets up there and talks, and he seems competent in the things that he's talking about, and he's espousing causes that people in the Democrat Party really say they believe in and want to champion for, and he can support that with his track record. But the likability factor just isn't there. There's no warmth to this guy. Maybe people think that a businessman has to be that way, and they're like, they need a businessman to beat a businessman. But of course, President Trump relates to people in a much warmer fashion. So I just don't see Tom Steyer as working for the Democrats. He might work on paper, but not in actual practice.
Well, in conclusion, for what I'll say is the conversion theory is not working in the Democrats' favor. What I mean by that is when you convert a voter from one party to the other, it actually counts as two, because you're increasing the spread. A vote cast in one direction all of a sudden vectors over to the other direction, so your net gain is double the one individual. And so we have to look at the conversion mentality and how is that playing out? What is the dominant theme there? And it looks to me like the Democrats are playing to their base very effectively, and they're really keeping that core, that anti-Trump core together through emotional attachment to that theme, the anti-Trump theme, with some amount of attention to the healthcare and the child care and some other issues, but that seems to be their dominant issue. However, the problem is the bleed off is happening in the form of actual organized movements of conversion, such as the walk away movement. And also, I think there's another one called Black Voices for Trump, which is fairly well organized. And they may not be major movements, but again, they have double the traction. And I don't see the movement. Let's go around the room and around the table and see. But is anyone? What's the feeling on conversion the other direction? Is there a movement? I don't see any organized movement that would change a vote that was cast in 2016 to a negative vote for one of these candidates.
Well, what I'll point out in your conversion analysis there is that there aren't really two parties in America. Yeah, I mean, yes, on paper there are, but people, when they have a political affiliation, they're actually independence is often at least as large as either of the other two. So you've really got three groups. You've got Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And people tend to think, well, the independents, they're just somebody that doesn't have a home because they haven't found a party that resonates with them or a candidate that resonates with them. But I tend to see it as more of a permanent fixture in American politics. It's been this way for a few decades now, where independence has been a growing group. So I think that that will stay around for a while, and Americans are beginning to see themselves as, I think, more independently minded and less party minded. Granted, there are strong centers to both the Republican and the Democrat parties, and no strong center for independents. But there's something about being independent that historically has resonated with Americans, and I don't see that going away. So that I say that as a kind of a counterpoint, Ken, to your arithmetic there, that somebody can leave the Democrat Party and walk away, but they may not join the Republican Party. They might, be more open to it than they were, but they're they've been burned once. They don't want to get burned again.
Now, how do you see that interacting with the uninvolved, with just the stay-at-home voter, non-voter?
Well, I think the reality show aspect of politics today, because of President Trump, has really moved people off of the sidelines that were on the sidelines. And I think there is more of a participation now by the people that have been sitting it out because they were displeased by either of the two parties. So, yeah, I think you're getting more of the independent voters, whether or not they actually register as such or not, are tending to get involved than they have been in the past. And of course, once they're involved, they would be mobilized in one direction or the other. I think that President Trump has been more effective at that than the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party is basically playing the same game. As you've pointed out in the past, they've been running on the issue of, we're the party of the underdog, we're the party of the minority, we're the party of the working man for decades and decades, if not a century. And they just have kind of run out of new groups to champion, to the point where championing the latest fringe group actually alienates significant numbers within their own party. So President Trump is doing something new for the independents, but the Democrat Party, as I see it now, isn't yet. Tulsi may be the wave of the future there, but it's too early to tell.
Well, for my concluding comment, I would like to go back to what I said in the beginning, that this debate felt scripted to me. It almost didn't seem sincere. So there was so much repetition of some talking points, and there were a couple of what you could characterize as argumentative comments between candidates, but even that felt scripted and kind of contrived. So I think that my guess is that, because I'm a conspiracy theorist, I guess I kind of have a feeling that these things are actually settled behind closed doors, and the debate stage is really not where the determination is made who will be chosen as the candidate.
Every human being is a conspiracy theorist. How's that for a new meme?
Okay.
Well, it's true,
How about this? Independent thinkers are conspiracy theorists, as we don't write conspiracies off. There's always that possibility.
That's good too. Yeah. It's selling that. It's such a weaponized phrase. It's just amazing how they get away with that.
To the curious, the seekers, and the experts, we thank you for joining us for this look at this November 2019 Democrat debate. We hope that you have enjoyed this time as we have. If you have, we would ask that you please click like, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, look us up on BitChute, and check out our website. Once again, thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care.